very, very intense. So we need to dedicate one lesson to Tempest, next week's lesson to Hagseed, so that we cover every single tiny detail that your teachers want you to know, especially when you want to write a Band 6 style essay, okay? So today in particular, we're looking at the context, conventions, stylistic features, literally every minuscule detail about the Tempest that you need to add in your essays, okay? So once you've had that Google document out and you've written a little note to yourself, please let me know and I can start today's lesson, okay? So just a thumbs up again. Wonderful. Awesome. Awesome. Very fast. Okay. So a quick update or a recap is, what is Module A textual conversations all about? Now, there are many, many layers to it, but especially when we're looking at Tempest in particular, there's only tiny details that you need to remember. Okay. So Module A is dedicated about how did your composer and their context have an impact on the ideas that they wrote about? That's literally it. So at the end of the day, this essay that you write for William Shakespeare, Margaret Atwood, is literally all about what was happening in Shakespeare's time, like his personal life, his religion, cultural issues, psychological issues, philosophical issues that surrounded him and his society. How did they all come together and impact what he wrote in the play? That's it. That's all you need to communicate in your essay, is how does context directly impact the ideas, the themes, the character, the storyline that Shakespeare has written, okay? So that's step number one. Now, what makes it a bit more intriguing now is then you do a comparison between Hagseed, which is the newer text, and now you're going to ask yourself, what did Margaret Atwood do that is either same to Shakespeare or different? So you're basically now trying to argue, what are the similarities and differences between the text, okay? Now, in particular, there are two rubric words that you guys need to memorize like your life depends on it for this term. And we have to use this continuously throughout our essays, okay? So word number one is what we call resonances. And resonance is basically you telling your teacher, this is the similarity between Margaret Atwood's text, Hagseed, and Tempest. So first rubric word that I'd like all of you guys to write down is the word resonances. And in simple English, it just means what are the similarities. Now, next week, I'm going to go more into detail about this with you guys, but the similarity can be literally anything. It could be character name, the character's gender, the setting, the character's trauma, the character's storyline, the revenge that they want to seek, the outcome, like every tiny similarity that you notice that Margaret Atwood has with William Shakespeare, we consider that as a resonance, okay? So that's rubric point number one, is what are the similarities between Margaret Atwood and Shakespeare? And your second key word that you're going to use quite a lot is dissonances. So dissonances basically means what is different between the two texts. So what did Margaret Atwood not do? Why did she get rid of religion? Why did she not show any signs of female oppression? Why did she make it modern day setting? Why did she make it Canada, right? So differences, any single tiny differences that you notice Margaret Atwood do that goes against Shakespeare, we call that a dissonance, okay? Don't worry, we're going to go very much into detail next week with this, but as long as you remember the two words, one means similarities, the other means differences, okay? Now, when you've written that out, please let me know. We can move on to the next step. Just a thumbs up again. All right, any questions, just raise your hands and I'll be able to get back to you guys, okay? All right, wonderful. Now, to make this a bit more trickier, your teacher is now going to create kind of like a variable here. So remember at the start here, I've written to what extent, and your teachers want you to actually incorporate those words. And there are three words that you can use to show your teacher what extent are these similarities and differences, okay? So the first two are what we call mirror and align. And these words can only work for resonances, which is why I've put it up in that section there, okay? So step number one is that you found out, yes, there is a similarity between Margaret Atwood and William Shakespeare. Then you're going to ask yourself, is it like 100% similarity? Like the fact that they have the same names, or the fact that the revenge is the same, or the daughter dies, or like any tiny detail that is literally the exact same, we call it a mirror. And that's what the rubric wants you to do, okay? So if the similarity is 100%, you call it a mirror. If the similarity is like 60% the same, not exactly perfect, but there are some slight differences, we call that an align, okay? So this is really important, is once you've determined that there are similarities, you now need to tell your teacher what extent is it? Is it 100% or kind of like a 60% similarity there, okay? And then finally, with the dissonances, you could either just have a difference, like they don't agree with each other, but there's a very drastic difference as well, which is what we call collide. And that means Margaret Atwood does not agree with Shakespeare here at all. There's 100% disagreement. One perfect example I can give you guys is about like female oppression. Shakespeare likes to do it a lot in his plays because, you know, back in the time that was considered the way society was designed, that women had to abide by male decisions. Whereas in Margaret Atwood's newer text, she completely disagrees with that. So she removes any single sign of female oppression. So she collides with him here. So collides means 100% disagreement. They hate each other on this topic. All right, and that's all the rubric words I'd like you guys to note down for now. Once you've done that, we're going to dive right into William Shakespeare now, okay? So just a thumbs up that you're ready to move on. If you have any questions, just raise your hands and I can answer them. All right. Wonderful. Awesome. So what we're going to be doing today is specifically looking at the following rubric requirements. Okay, so for you guys to understand what did Margaret Atwood do same or different, you first of all need to do what was Shakespeare doing at the time. Okay, so it's kind of like you need to take a step back and ask yourself, what was happening in Shakespeare's time? Why did he write The Tempest? What influenced him? What was his philosophical lens? What's the psychological lens? So today we're going to learn all the background information behind The Tempest. And next week in lesson, we're going to now ask ourselves what's different and same between Margaret Atwood and him, okay? So specifically today, we're going to be looking at the issues. So issues in your rubric basically means what themes was William Shakespeare suggesting here? So first thing to write down is issues. It's just the rubric way to say what ideas or themes is William Shakespeare trying to impart in his text, okay? Now, these are key words you guys are going to be bringing up in your essays, so that's why I'm telling you guys in advance. So don't forget these words. We have to embed them into the fabric of our essay to get that band 6 response, okay? The next is values. So values is basically morally and ethically speaking. Again, this is tied with religion, so our religious context. What is the text trying to teach us about? What's the moral warning here? What's the ethical warning here? What's the moral message behind The Tempest, okay? So values is all about moral and ethics, yeah? And we have to understand the religion at the time to better understand the moral and ethics of the story. All right, next one is assumptions. Now, assumptions a bit of a tricky one, but hopefully I can simplify it for you guys. Assumption basically means that Shakespeare was already living in a time where these kind of things occurring in society was normal. So it's like already known information, so he doesn't have to clarify it. So an example I can give you guys is he already knew that patriarchy was the way society was designed. Men get to dictate the lives of women, and that's okay because that's the assumption in society. So assumptions is basically stereotypes or ideas or values that he doesn't have to really explain to us because that was the common logic at the time. People believed in that. It was agreed upon. You don't have to do any explanation to justify it, okay? So assumption is basically pre-assumed knowledge that the composer of the time felt the audience should have already known about. So we technically now need to take a dive back and understand the context of the time to better understand the assumptions that he was making there, okay? And last but not least, perspectives is what kind of lenses is he taking here? So there might be a psychological lens, a philosophical lens, a cultural lens, a religious lens. So don't worry, I will be providing you guys with all the possible lenses and perspectives that he takes. But as long as you just note down that perspective means all the different variety of angles, whether it's religious, philosophical, cultural, psychological, that come together and influence the creation of The Tempest. All right, so these are the 4 key words that we're going to be understanding today to hopefully understand The Tempest wholeheartedly, so you don't have to really understand it anymore. Once you've written this out, please let me know, and we can move on to analyzing The Tempest now. Again, if you have any questions, just raise your hands, okay? All right, wonderful. All right, so quick plot summary for those of us who haven't read The Tempest. I'm going to give you guys the quickest summary possible. Yes, there is way more layers in the text itself, but your school will get into that when you guys go into school, okay? So we've got Prospero, the man right here, the old man, don't worry, I just found stickers online. So he was previously the king or the Duke of Milan, okay? So he was a very respected nobleman. And this is his daughter, Miranda, okay? Now, there's a bit of an issue where his brother decides to betray him and take the throne from his hands. And then he gets kicked off with his daughter to this island right here, right? So he was originally the king of Milan, and then he didn't do a good job of keeping his role well. So then he and his daughter were both banished, sent on a boat to a random island where apparently magical and like fairy creatures all exist, okay? So that's step number one. Now, essentially what happens is Prospero is plotting revenge against his brother from day one. So the minute he arrives on the island, he goes, I loved my brother so much. My brother is the reason why I was betrayed. How could he do that to me? I am going to practice black magic. So he spends the entire, like however many years that he's on the island to practice black magic and get all the support from these like angels and fairies, etc., to learn how to take revenge against his brother. Now, what happens is one day, well, not exactly one day, he figures out that his brother is actually traveling with a bunch of royalty, including the brother's son, so Prospero's nephew. And he figures out that what he's going to do is create a lightning and then a thunderous storm and essentially bring the ship over to the island. So he kind of interferes with the natural order there and goes, I'm going to create a situation wherein my brother's boat is going to catch on fire, completely get destroyed, and then I'm going to get them all to come to the island where I'm going to now start the plan of my revenge. So he's very like a grand schemer here, okay? And this is Antonio's son. So Prospero's nephew, Miranda's cousin, Antonio's son. Now, this guy's pretty important. So hopefully we're all on par right now. Just a thumbs up that. So far we're good. Okay? Wonderful. All right, awesome. So what then happens is Prospero, Miranda, Ariel, and Caliban are the people on the island. Yes, there are heaps of other people right now, but these are your 4 crucial people who were originally on the island. So you have Ariel, who's a fairy who has magical powers. She flutters around, helps Prospero in his evil plan to take over his brother. And you've got Caliban, who's meant to be a complete savage, like he's crazy savage, but he's the true owner of the island. So he's the true owner of the island. And Prospero comes and goes, no way, I was the king, so I own the island right now. So typical British person likes to colonize everything. And so basically all 4 of them are getting together to now figure out a way that how can they execute their revenge, okay? And then what happens is, of course, you've got the love triangle kicking in here. So Miranda and Ferdinand start liking each other. I know they're meant to be niece and nephew, I mean like cousins essentially, but they start liking each other, which leads Prospero to now start doubting his revenge plan. So yes, he will go on a journey to plot the actual revenge, get people together, but slowly his plan starts to have doubts in him because Miranda and Ferdinand really start liking each other. So he starts to go, wait a minute, should I really seek revenge? Is it really worth it or not? And finally, he realizes by the end of the play that it's better to forgive and forget than to go down this reckless pathway of trying to plan a revenge against your own brother. Like mistakes happen, love is love, let it happen. I will forgive myself, okay? And then essentially that's the end there. Yes, Aditi, you can unmute yourself there if you want.
Wait, who was Ferdinand again? Was he Alonso's son?
Yeah, so I think he's Antonio's or Alonso's son, one of those. So, but he's going to be the main, the protagonist, like I guess the protagonist in our play there, okay?
Wait, it said Antonio, I think, but I thought it was Alonso.
So I think it's Antonio's son, if I'm correct, because it's his own nephew that she starts to it's Prospero's own nephew that she starts to fall in love with, so her own cousin. So that would make it Antonio's son.
Oh,
yeah.
I thought Alonso was like upset about his like, because his son was like lost, and that was Ferdinand.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll double check at the end, but as long as you kind of get the plot, you're okay.
Yeah.
All good. Oh, good. All right. So as long as everyone's okay with the plot so far, that like basically the plot outline, or I guess the outcome of this entire story, is that sometimes revenge is futile. You have to give it up because it's better to forgive and forget rather than going down your disastrous path of seeking revenge. Okay. So as long as everyone's okay with that plot outline. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to dive right deep into the analysis right now. So this is where it starts to get very crazy. Please let me know if you guys need a break or like, stop to ask a couple of questions. So the inspiration behind the play, like why did William Shakespeare wake up one morning and decide to write a play about, a fleet of ship going missing on a random island and then everyone rocking up on the island? Well, at the time, something really, I guess, amazing or miraculous would have happened in England. So it's called the Sea Ventura, okay? So the Sea Ventura happened in 1609 in England, where during the colonization period, so this is when London was sending out a bunch of ships to different native countries in the hopes to colonize them, right? So 9 ships left England with 500 colonists. I want you guys to write that down. And they were planning to settle in Virginia. So that's all the way down in America, okay? Now, what essentially happens is, unfortunately, the Sea Ventura ends up getting stuck in Bermuda, the iconic Devil's Island, right? So we all know that Bermuda Triangle is a bit deadly. There's a lot of conspiracy theories that whichever aircraft or sort of ship gets into that sort of section there, they always go missing, right? So it somehow ends up in Bermuda, known as the Devil's Island. And for literally an entire year, they lost connection with England altogether. So this entire fleet of 9 ships went missing one random afternoon, and nobody heard from them for an entire year. So, of course, England declared that this was a disaster. They had lost all the 500 people, etc. Bad news started getting published. But one morning, randomly in 1610, it was discovered that every single survivor on that fleet happened to make it to Virginia alive. So all of a sudden, the British people, instead of like trying to take this scientifically, they started going down the magic and suspicion and religious and Jesus sort of avenue there. And they started to believe that maybe God had intervened, like someone powerful, divine intervened and helped them rediscover their route and go to Virginia. Okay, so if you look at here, it says, this incident inspired Shakespeare to write a story about loss, rediscovery, nature's kindness, and islands in general. So this story is our inspiration. We do definitely need to bring this up in our essay. So please make sure you note this down and just kind of get the idea of it, that ship goes missing and randomly 1 year later, they are all found alive, thriving in the islands that they were supposed to colonize. Once you've written that out, please let me know. Just a thumbs up would be great. Again, you will have access to all the slideshows right after class. So just the keywords would be great, okay? All right, wonderful. So just keywords. Ten more seconds before I move forward. Wonderful. Awesome. All right, moving forward now. So what is our context? So again, a new heading for yourself here, and we desperately need to keep involving this in our essay. So time and time again, your entire essay and analysis is centered around the context of William Shakespeare, but there are multiple avenues that we're going to take, okay? So first of all, historically speaking, that the play was written between 1610, 1611, and this is the last play Shakespeare ever wrote in his entire life, and that is very important to mention in your essays, okay? And I'm going to explain why in a couple of seconds when we get to a stylistic feature. So it's a last play that was written by Shakespeare, and something interesting, this is the only play out of Shakespeare's entire collection of plays that is completely original, the ideas in it. So he didn't steal it from anyone. It's not a remake of some Italian original text or anything like that. He came up with the ideas purely on his own, okay? So it's all from the mind of Shakespeare. All right. And last but not least, one of the key factors behind the influence in writing this play is about colonization. So how the British Empire was expanding its reach to other native islands and countries around them, and the impacts of colonization. So how it affected native indigenous people and how it damaged their culture and religion and their customs as well. So when we're reading this play, it's very crucial that one of your body paragraphs, literally one of the themes, is dedicated on colonization. That's going to be a theme that we look at. Once you've written that out, please let me know. Just a thumbs up so I know we're on the same pace. Wonderful. Oh, awesome. Awesome. That's most of us there. All right, 10 more seconds and I'm going to be moving forward. All right. Next one is the religious context at the time. So we actually call this Jacobean England. So it's a shift between Elizabethan to Jacobean. Now, what happened basically was Queen Elizabeth died and her Scottish cousin, King James, became the king at the time, okay? Now, there is a massive transformation in the way the plays were also designed. So Queen Elizabeth, she liked more of those humanist texts, like about redemption, about sin, about morality, about love, right? She liked all of those ones. Whereas King James was the exact opposite. He loved all the violent, darker, gruesome, supernatural, witchcraft type of text. So you'll notice that even Shakespeare's plays started to become a lot darker and violent once they entered the Jacobean England era, okay? And hence, one important factor to note down is even the audience enjoyed this quite a lot. So the audience goers at the time to the Globe Theatre really, really enjoyed topics of violence, of treachery, so betrayal, and morality. So what makes a person good or bad? They loved the concept of deception, like people backstabbing each other, loved ones betraying one another. That was I guess, the general consensus at the time. That's what audiences preferred to watch and see. So Jacobean England meant Shakespeare's plays became more darker and violent, and they loved the theme of treachery and betrayal. All right, let me know when you guys have written that out. Just a thumbs up would be great that you have written it out, and we'll move on to the next one. All right, so moving forward now, what was happening at the time, contextually speaking as well, is London, or I guess England in general, had entered what we call the Age of Discovery. So this is something really crucial to note down in your essays as well, is during the time when Tempest was being designed, King James had, I guess, engaged in a lot of expeditions. So he sent out a bunch of people to go and colonize new land. So they literally went everywhere, like the entire map was being explored by the British. And basically the goal was there to go and subjugate the natives. So what we mean by subjugate is not to actually go in and create good relationships with them, but basically enter the land and go, I am the owner of this land now. You are all my slaves. So instead of trying to create like a treaty or a peace strategy or trying to get them together, they went and literally oppressed the natives, okay? So the Europeans started to unjustly subjugate natives, and it allowed the British to exploit their land. That was the purpose of the Age of Discovery, was to expand the British Empire even more than what it was before, to native islands. All right, once you've written that out, just a thumbs up would be good. Any questions, just raise your hands, guys, okay? All right, wonderful. All right, and then again, as I've been repeating over and over again, the reason why Britain was engaging in the Age of Discovery is because they loved the idea of colonization. So they were one of those people that were like, we need to expand our territory. We need to make sure that we are one of the biggest empires in the entire world altogether. So the purpose of colonization was to take their land and thus take control of the world. And your essays, the first body paragraph that we actually write in class in about 2 weeks from now, will be on the topic of colonization and about what was Shakespeare's point of view on colonization there. Okay, now this will lead to our first theme. So the first issue that we're looking in today's lesson is the theme of colonialism, okay? So please write that down, that we're looking at the first issue. So I'll just go back here. First issue, remember this is our rubric word. And in simple layman's term, it just means the theme. So first issue for today's lesson will be the concept of colonialism. All right. Now, how do we notice these links in the play? And I'm going to give you guys 4, or I think there are 3 in today's lesson, links in which we notice colonialism being apparent in the play. So step number 1 is when Prospero arrives on the island, like once he's been banished by his brother and he arrives on the island, he immediately imposes himself upon it. So instead of trying to understand the culture, try to befriend everyone, get to know everyone, he immediately arrives and goes, I am now the king of this island. I take control. Okay. So please write down what I've italicized there. So Prospero arrives at the island, subdues it, imposes his own culture upon the native inhabitants. Okay. Now, when we're writing our body paragraphs, we're basically going to be analyzing how the island is actually symbolic or represents all the nations that were colonized by Britain during that time. So they are technically like an allegory or a symbolism or a parable for all the suffering that every single native island went through during the time that British were colonizing the world. So the island is a representation of America and other native nations which suffered the same impositions as a result of British colonization. So don't worry, that's for later when we write our body paragraphs, but as long as you start to get the idea that it's not just a random island, the island represents every single nation that suffered due to British colonization. All right. Once you've written that out, just a thumbs up would be great. So that's the first link of colonialism. Wonderful. Second one is literally the depiction of Caliban. Okay, so Caliban, the minute we get introduced to him, he's kind of described as looking like this on the right-hand side there. So Prospero takes power away from the true owner of the land. Like Caliban is supposedly the owner of this land, and he starts to treat him as being like this deformed, ugly, evil, cruel being, because he's using his British perspective here. So instead of trying to understand that maybe this is the norm of society or this is the culture, this is the structure, he immediately intervenes and goes, no, you look hideous, you look evil to me, I am your owner now, so you're my slave. Okay. And the worst thing is that Prospero literally treats him as an animal, like worse than an animal, like a savage, even though this thing has feelings. So Caliban has feelings, he has emotions, he has sympathy, he has empathy, he has everything that makes him a human, just not physically. And why should we treat him like that? That's a question that Shakespeare raises here. So what this ties back into is the idea that British thought that they were superior than every other race during colonialism. So when we analyze Caliban, we have to bring in the theory about British superiority and how that influenced colonization. So poor Caliban, he's one of my favorite characters, but he gets treated so terribly in the entire play. So that's link number 2 of how we notice colonization in the play. Once you've written that out, please let me know as well. With a thumbs up. Wonderful. All right, wonderful. And then our last and final one that we're looking at for today is Ariel. And Ariel is the fairy on the island. So the third link that we noticed of colonialism in Tempest is that Prospero, by the middle of the play, he perceives himself as being better than everyone else. And when we say better, he thinks physically, civilly, and intelligence-wise, he is better than every single person on the island, including the natives there and his own daughter. So that's another element of colonialism that's present in the Tempest. All right. And when we notice it from the perspective of Ariel, is that Ariel is a free spirit. She's basically one of the most freest natives on the entire island. And Prospero literally goes and exploits her, and he basically cages her down. Like, I wouldn't say physically cages her, but metaphorically he cages her or imprisons her in the island where she's supposed to be free and have free will. Okay. So he enslaves her, exploits her, uses her for his own selfish ends. And she essentially will become an allegory. So allegory means that she represents, or her journey, her suffering, her characterization represents the entire suffrage of native individuals due to European colonization. So she is like a metaphor. So she's a representation. She represents the entire suffering of every single native person during colonization. All right, once you've written that out, please let me know. All right, so any questions so far about how we notice colonialism in the play?